Hello, 11112. I don't hear it. Hey, Baker. Baker. Can you come here? Okay.
I don't know because it happened here and it happened over here.
Which is also. Oh, 1-1.
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2 3, 1 2 3.
Test, test, 1 2. Again? Test, test, 1 2. Court reporter, mic check.
One. Test, test. Hello. Are you getting feedback? Hello. 1-1-1-1-2-1-2. Test, test, test. Hello, hello, hello. 1. All right.
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2 3, 1 2 3.
One, two, 1 2. Test. Test 1-1-2. Test, test. I don't hear. Hello? Is that working? Okay. Hit that to talk. Make sure you hit it again to not talk.
talk.
Yeah.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's hearing on the federal government's use of Social Security numbers. Unfortunately, Chairman Sam Johnson was unable to be here with us today to discuss one of his favorite topics, ending the unnecessary use of Social Security numbers. I know everyone here joins me in wishing Chairman Johnson a speedy recovery. I would like to welcome Chairman Hurd of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee's IT Subcommittee and all of the IT Subcommittee members for joining us in the Ways and Means Committee hearing room today. Back in 1936, when Social Security began issuing Social Security numbers, they were only used to track earnings and administer the Social Security program. Back then, it wasn't much thought about keeping your number a secret. But today, Social Security numbers are the key to the kingdom for identity thieves. Social Security and identity security experts make a point of telling Americans how important it is to protect their numbers. Social Security numbers are valuable targets for identity theft because of their regular use by both federal government and private sector as a unique identifier, especially by the financial industry. Time and again, we're reminded to protect our Social Security cards in order to avoid identity theft and to be careful with what documents we throw away in the trash. Our Social Security numbers are connected to so many personal aspects of our lives, from our Social Security benefits and finances to our medical histories and our education. But in recent years, privacy concerns have become more and more critical. When I was in law school back in the dark ages, our grades used to be posted on the wall to keep secret whose grades they were by Social Security number. Of course, they were posted alphabetically. So it wasn't that hard to figure out whose was whose. In fact, one of my very good friends in law school's last name was Ziegler. And he was the smartest guy in the class, and he always made an A and blew the curve, so everybody just gave him a hard time. But his Social Security number was always the one at the bottom of the list. And until not that long ago, I probably could recite you Mr. Ziegler's Social Security number. While colleges and universities have since changed their ways, the federal government has yet to fully catch up. Just over 10 years ago, under President Bush's leadership, the Office of Management and Budget issued a memorandum for the safeguarding of personally identifiable information, including the Social Security number. The memo called for federal departments and agencies to reduce or replace the use of Social Security numbers across the federal government. Unfortunately, while some progress has been made in reducing the use of Social Security numbers, 10 years later, there's still much work to be done. This hearing is about making sure that Social Security numbers are only used when necessary, and that the federal government is doing what it can and what it should to make sure that when Social Security numbers are used and collected, they are kept safe. The Office of Personnel Management hack in 2015 is an example of what happens when the federal government collects Social Security numbers but does not keep them safe. And that negligence comes with a cost to both the affected individuals and to the taxpayers. The American people rightly deserve and expect that the federal government protect their Social Security numbers and only uses them when necessary. I thank all of our witnesses for being here. I look forward to hearing from you about how your agencies are working to tackle this challenge and what more needs to be done. I now recognize Mr. Larson for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we join with you in certainly wishing our dear friend and colleague Sam Johnson a speedy recovery, and would like to add how fortunate we are on the Ways and Means Committee to have two iconic American heroes serving on the same committee. When you think about Sam Johnson and his service to this country and all that he endured on behalf of this nation, nearly beaten to death by the Viet Cong, and then you think of John Lewis and all he endured in this country and nearly beaten to death in his own country. So we have these two iconic legends, and I'm so proud to serve with Sam and was happy to that he asked me to introduce with him the Social Security Must Avert Identity Loss or HR 1513 to require Social Security Administration to remove beneficiaries' Social Security numbers from mailed notices. And Mr. Johnson, as I think everybody on the committee knows, is such an incredible gentleman. We also have taken every opportunity in the subcommittee to renew a request, that I hope the committee will travel to Plano, Texas. Will you be for that? And that we have an opportunity to, in as much as Mr. Johnson has indicated this is his last term, to have a meeting there in Plano, Texas that would honor Mr. Johnson and the committee and this particular topic area that he's so vitally concerned about. I also want to recognize Chairman Hurd, who is with us, and the lead Democrat, Robin Kelly, for being here in our meeting room as well. Since 2014, hundreds of millions of Americans have lost their personally identified information, including their Social Security numbers, to large-scale cyber attacks. The number was originally created in 1936 for the purpose of running the nation's new Social Security system. However, its usefulness as a unique governmental identifier has made it near ubiquitous across government and the private sector. To date, Social Security Administration has not suffered any large-scale data breach, but ongoing vigilance is needed, including adequate support for updating and modernizing Social Security Administration's IT structure. Altogether, Social Security Administration has been able to remove the 9-digit SSN from about 1/3 of the mailings it sends out. Moving forward, they have committed to removing them from the remaining notices wherever they revise a notice, which requires computer upgrades. The severe constraints on Social Security Administration's budget, however, are preventing the agency from removing numbers from all the notices right away, as they estimated it would cost $14 million to do so immediately rather than piecemeal. More alarmingly, since 2010, the number of beneficiaries has grown by 13% as the baby boomers enter retirement, but Social Security's operating budget has fallen by more than 10% in that same period. The Social Security Administration simply cannot serve more and more people with less and less money each year. Social Security Administration is already struggling to serve its beneficiaries at the level they deserve. My constituents are experiencing multi-year wait times on disability appeals and hearings. Their phone calls are going unanswered. They face delays in correcting errors in their benefits and payments. To make matters worse, the President's fiscal year 2018 budget released today also attacks Social Security benefits for those with disabilities as much as $70 billion over 10 years. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit for the record the 13 times that Donald Trump promised not to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. President Trump has promised repeatedly and explicitly throughout the campaign not to cut Social Security or Medicare. This broken promise should be especially alarming to millions of people who voted for the president, who spent their working lives paying premiums into the system, believing those benefits would be there for them in retirement, and should they become disabled. Bottom line is this: Social Security is the nation's insurance program. It is not an entitlement. It is the insurance that individuals have paid for throughout a lifetime. The problems with Social Security at its core, this issue that we're taking up today, especially as it relates to theft, is vitally important to protect people's identity. But equally important, and the responsibility of this committee, is its actuarial soundness. This is the most efficient government-operated program in the history of the nation. Ask any private sector insurance company if they could have a 99% loss ratio. They would die for that. And there's no product on the open market where you could produce old age and survivors benefits, disability, and a pension plan and survivors benefits. That is the uniqueness of Social Security. That is why it is America's insurance plan that our citizens have paid for. This is not an entitlement, and we'll continue to make that point. And I hope later this year, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Johnson has been very gracious about saying that we'll get an opportunity to have hearings on our bills that will look at expanding and making solvent well into the next century Social Security for all of its American citizens. It's the nation's insurance program.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Hurd for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Over 2 years plus that I've been in Congress, I've learned one thing, and that's Americans expect the federal government to protect their personal information. Sadly, as evidenced by the devastating data breach at OPM, which affected more than 20 million people, this is simply not the case. The American people deserve better from their government. If stolen, we all know that Social Security numbers can be used to perpetuate identity theft or worse. You never know what a piece of personal information the bad actors need to achieve their goals, whether they are looking to steal money or threaten the national security of our nation. The Oversight Committee recently held a hearing on the IRS data breach where bad actors hacked into the Department of Education, stole income information from financial aid applications, and then used that information to file fraudulent tax returns with the IRS. All of the agencies appearing before us today collect and retain a wealth of information on individual Americans, particularly Social Security numbers. It is essential that we reduce the unnecessary use of Social Security numbers, both on printed forms and electronically, in transition and at rest. In fact, tomorrow the House is scheduled to consider Rep. Valadero's Social Security Number Fraud Prevention Act of 2017, which was passed out of committee on voice vote and prohibits agencies from sending Social Security numbers by mail unless the head of the agency deems it absolutely necessary. The Social Security Administration has over 175 million wage earners and records on pretty much everybody, living and dead. This is a treasure trove of information that must be protected. The Veterans Administration has health records on over 8 million veterans and their families. And I can imagine few other records as intimate as an individual's health record. The VA currently uses Social Security numbers as a patient identifier. Protecting these numbers is critically important for all Americans, but given that Social Security numbers are frequently exchanged with our most at-risk members of society, such as our seniors, disabled, and veterans, we must take utmost precaution to prevent the unnecessary risk of exposure for these populations. One of the recommendations that came out of the committee's investigation into the OPM breach was that agencies reduce their use of Social Security numbers in order to mitigate the risk of identity theft. As agencies undertake this transition, it is essential that they rethink how they use, collect, and store Social Security numbers, and indeed all pieces of personal information they collect. I'm proud to be here today with my colleagues from the Oversight Committee as well as my colleagues from the Ways and Means Committees in this important joint hearing to examine what's working and what we can do better. Today I hope to learn more about what efforts the federal government is taking to reduce its collection, use, and storage of Social Security numbers. And thank you for being here today, and I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Kelly for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rice and Hurd and Ranking Member Larson for holding this important hearing. Originally created to track the earnings of individuals and determine eligibility for Social Security benefits, the Social Security number has become the principal method used to verify an individual's identity. But the proliferation of their use poses serious challenges to data security and identity theft protection. In 2007, when the Office of Management and Budget recognized that reducing the use of Social Security numbers at agencies could reduce the risk of identity theft, 10 years ago this week, OMB issued a memorandum directing agencies to reduce their use of Social Security numbers by examining where their collection was unnecessary and creating plans to end such collection within 18 months. Now, on the 10-year anniversary of the guidance, we have the opportunity to examine the challenges that have stymied agencies' efforts while learning from those agencies who have had success in their initiative. The Social Security Administration no longer prints Social Security numbers on statements, cost of living notices, or benefit checks. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is in the middle of efforts to remove the numbers from all Medicare cards by April 2019. Likewise, the Department of Veterans Affairs has ceased printing Social Security numbers on prescription bottles, certain forms, and correspondence, and is working to find an alternate means of identification that will maintain patient safety while reducing the visibility of Social Security numbers on patient wristbands. These concrete steps represent real progress, and I commend the agencies on their work so far. But barriers that still exist to full implementation of OMB's guidance. One of those barriers is the lack of strong coordinated approach from OMB itself. GAO found that the 2007 memorandum did not define unnecessary use, nor did it outline requirements such as timeline or performance goals. As a result, many agencies were vague and subject to varied interpretation over the years. Additionally, OMB did not require agencies to update their inventories of Social Security number collection points, making it difficult to determine whether agencies were actually reducing collection and use. OMB must provide clear direction to agencies and strengthen its monitoring of compliance. In addition to poor coordination by OMB, federal efforts to reduce Social Security numbers use have faced other challenges. Agencies are statutorily and legally required to collect Social Security numbers for identity verification in a number of programs, and Social Security numbers remain the standard for identity verification across government programs. OPM briefly took steps to address this issue by working to create an alternate identifier in 2008 and again in 2015. However, a lack of approved funding prevented these efforts from going forward. Until Congress refines the requirements mandating Social Security number collection, an alternate government-wide identifier is created, significant reductions in Social Security numbers use seems unlikely. Outdated legacy IT systems also cause agencies to struggle to attain their reduction goals. Agencies do not have the funds to replace these systems and start anew. This subcommittee has spoken at great length about the need to update the federal government's IT infrastructure, and we must put our money where our mouth is. I'm concerned that across-the-board budget and personnel cuts proposed by the Trump administration will take us in the opposite direction and make it harder to accomplish our Social Security number reduction goals. I hope my colleagues will keep this and the need to protect Americans from identity theft in mind as we discuss fiscal year 2018 budget proposals. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. As is customary, any member is welcome to submit a statement for the hearing record. Before we move on to our testimony today, I want to remind our witnesses to please limit their oral statements to 5 minutes. However, without objection, all of the written testimony will be made part of the hearing record. We have 5 witnesses today. Seated at the table are Gregory Wilhusen, Director, Information Security Issues, Government Accountability Office. Mariana Lacanfora, Acting Deputy Commissioner, Office of Retirement and Disability Policy, Social Security Administration. David DeVries, Chief Information Officer, Office of Personnel Management, and Karen Jackson, Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And finally, John Oswalt, Executive Director for Privacy, Office of Information and Technology, Department of Veterans Affairs. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here. Pursuant to the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated. Mr. Wilhusen, welcome and thanks for being here. Please proceed.
Thank you.
If I butchered your name, I'm sorry.
No, you did perfect. Thank you. Chairman Rice and Hurd, Ranking Members Larson and Kelly, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me today to testify at today's hearing on executive branch efforts to reduce the unnecessary use of Social Security numbers. My statement is based on our draft report on federal efforts to reduce the collection, use, and display of these numbers. We have provided a draft report to 25 agencies for comment. We anticipate issuing the final report to you later this summer after we receive agency comments. Before I begin, if I may, I'd like to recognize several members of my team who are instrumental in developing my statement or performing the work underpinning it. With me is John DeFerrari and Marisol Cruz, who led this work, and Quentin Dorsey. In addition, Andrew Beggs, Shawnice Wallace, Dave Ploker, Priscilla Smith, and Scott Bettis make significant contributions. Beginning in 2007, OPM, OMB, and the Social Security Administration undertook several actions aimed at reducing or eliminating the unnecessary collection, use, and display of Social Security numbers on a government-wide basis. However, these actions have had limited success. OPM issued guidance to agencies and acted to eliminate or mask Social Security numbers on personnel forms used throughout the federal government. It also promulgated a draft regulation to limit federal collection, use, and display of Social Security numbers, but withdrew the proposed rule because no alternate federal employee identifier was available that would provide the same utility. In 2007, OMB required agencies to establish plans for eliminating the unnecessary collection and use of Social Security numbers. OMB also began requiring agency reporting on reduction efforts as part of its annual FSMA reporting process. In 2007, the Social Security Administration developed an online clearinghouse on agencies' best practices for minimizing the use and display of Social Security numbers. However, this clearinghouse is no longer available. At the individual agency level, each of the 24 CFO Act agencies reported taking a variety of steps to reduce the collection, use, and display of Social Security numbers. These steps included developing and using alternate identifiers, masking, truncating, or blocking the display of these numbers on printed forms, correspondence, and computer screens, and filtering email to prevent transmittal of unencrypted numbers. However, agency officials noted that Social Security numbers cannot be completely eliminated from federal IT systems and records, in part because no other identifier offers the same degree of universal awareness and applicability. They identified 3 other challenges. First, several statutes and regulations require collection and use of Social Security numbers. Second, interactions with other federal agencies and external entities require the use of the number. And a third challenge pertained to technological hurdles that can slow replacement of the numbers and information systems. Reduction efforts in the executive branch have also been limited by more readily addressable shortcomings. Lacking direction from OMB, many agencies' reduction plans did not include key elements such as timeframes or performance indicators, calling into question the plan's utility. In addition, OMB has not required agencies to maintain up-to-date inventories of Social Security number collections and has not established criteria for determining when the number's use or display is unnecessary, leading to inconsistent determinations and definitions across the agencies. OMB has also not ensured that all agencies have submitted up-to-date progress reports and has not established performance metrics to measure and monitor agencies' efforts. Accordingly, in our draft report, we are making 5 recommendations to OMB to address these shortcomings. Until OMB and agencies adopt better and more consistent practices, their reduction efforts will likely remain limited and difficult to measure. Moreover, the risk of Social Security numbers being exposed and used to commit identity theft will remain greater than it need be. Chairman Rice, Chairman Hurd, Ranking Members Larson and Kelly, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Lacanfora, welcome and thanks for being here. Please proceed.
Acting Chairman Rice, Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittees. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the history of the Social Security number, how the Social Security Administration uses it to administer its programs, and efforts to reduce the number's use. I'm Mariana Lacanfora, Acting Deputy Commissioner for Retirement and Disability Policy. There's a rich history surrounding the Social Security number. Those responsible for implementing the new Social Security program understood that crediting earnings to the correct individual would be critical to the program's success. Names alone would not ensure accurate reporting. Accordingly, in 1936, we designed the 9-digit SSN and SSN card to allow employers to accurately report earnings. Today, over 80 years since the program's inception, we have issued around 500 million unique numbers to eligible individuals. The SSN continues to be essential to how we maintain records. Without it, we could not carry out our mission. However, the SSN and SSN card were never intended, nor do they serve as identification. We strongly encourage other agencies and the public to minimize their use. We also provide electronic verifications of SSNs to our federal and state partners to prevent improper payments. In 2016, we performed over 2 billion automated SSN verifications. Although we created the SSN, its use has increased dramatically by other entities over time. A 1943 executive order required federal agencies to use the SSN. Advances in computer technology and data processing in the 1960s further increased the use of the number. Congress also enacted legislation requiring the number for a variety of federal programs. Use of the SSN grew not just in the federal government, but throughout state and local governments, to banks, credit bureaus, hospitals, educational institutions, and other parts of the private sector. As use of the SSN has become more pervasive, so has the opportunity for misuse. We have taken numerous measures to help protect the integrity of the SSN. In 2001, we removed the full SSN from 2 of our largest mailings, the Social Security Statement and the Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment Notice. These notices account for about 1/3 of the roughly 352 million notices that we send out each year. In 2007, OMB issued a memo requiring agencies to review their use of the SSN and identify unnecessary use of the number. We recognize that although we need the SSN to administer our programs, we could and did refine all of our personnel processes to reduce reliance on the number. Still, we recognize that we need to do more. 2/3 of our notices have the Social Security number. Our notice infrastructure is complex. About 60 different applications generate notices, and every notice is created to respond to an individual's unique circumstances. Nevertheless, we are committed to replacing the SSN with a beneficiary notice code, or BNC, as we modify existing notices or create new ones. The BNC is a secure 13-character alphanumeric code that helps our employees identify the notice and the beneficiary and respond to inquiries quickly. We initially developed the BNC for use in the Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment Notice. Additionally, next year, we will replace the SSN with the BNC on benefit verification letters, as well as appointed representative and Social Security post-entitlement notices. Together, these mailings account for 42 million annual notices. We take great care to protect the integrity of the SSN and the personal information of the public we serve. Thank you for the opportunity to describe our efforts. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. LaCanfora. Mr. DeVries, welcome and thanks for being here. Please proceed.
Chairman Rice, Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to represent the Office of Personnel Management with respect to reducing the use of Social Security numbers as a personal identifier. In 1962, the Civil Service Commission adopted the SSN to identify federal employees. Over time, the SSN became universal to almost every piece of paper or its digital form in a federal employee's official personnel file. It became a de facto personnel identifier. The SSN was used for routine personal actions, to record training, to request health benefits, and for many other purposes. In 2007, OPM issued guidance to federal agencies to develop consistent and effective measures for use and safeguarding of federal employees' SSNs. The intent of these measures was to minimize the risk of identity theft and fraud in 2 ways. One, by eliminating the unnecessary use of SSN as an identifier, and by strengthening the protection of personal information, including SSNs, from theft or loss. Examples of the measures that we recommended were eliminating the unnecessary printing and display of the Social Security number on forms, reports, and your computer displays, and restricting access to the SSN to only those individuals who had a need to know and they were notified of their additional responsibilities to safeguard that. We also included privacy and confidentiality statements to go along with the warning. Finally, we came up with how do you mask it, or how do you take the Social Security numbers out of the forms itself there. Internal to OPM, we examined our internal policies with respect to the use of SSNs, and in 2012 issued an addendum to our information security and privacy policy. The updated policy identifies acceptable uses of the SSN, describes how the authorized use will be documented, and presented alternatives for SSN. This internal policy addendum notes that acceptable use of the SSN are only those that are provided for by law, executive order, require interoperability with organizations outside of OPM, or are required by operational necessities to achieve agency mission. For example, the SSN is a single identifier that is consistent across the security investigation process and may be necessary to complete an individual's background investigation, but it is now protected in both transit and in storage. OPM has taken other efforts to reduce the use of SSN since issuing the 2012 policy. OPM modified the USA Jobs and the USA Staffing systems so that neither collects SSNs from applicants. We also undertook an effort in 2016 to understand which IT systems maintain SSNs and how they use those to communicate with other programs. The initial inventory was completed in September 2016, and we are now using it to validate the progress made and identify other opportunities. In addition, we are updating the internal 2012 policy this year. It is difficult to completely eliminate the federal use of SSNs without a government-wide coordinated effort and dedicated funding. SSNs are generally the common element linking information among agencies, OPM, shared service providers, and benefit providers. In the fall of 2016, OMB and OPM proposed the Program Unique Identifier, or PUID, initiative to reduce the use of SSNs in many government systems and programs. The PUID initiative sought to facilitate the exchange of information without SSNs. This would be accomplished by providing an alternative numbering scheme to uniquely identify records across various programs and agencies. An initial proof of concept showed potential for continued study. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for having me here today to discuss OPM's role in reducing the use of SSNs and for your interest and support in this important issue here. Safeguarding the PI of our federal employees and others whose information we hold is of paramount importance to OPM. I would be happy to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeVries. Mrs. Jackson, thank you for being here. You can proceed.
Chairman Rice and Hurd, ranking members Larson and Kelly, and members of the subcommittees, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services work to safeguard the personally identifiable information of the beneficiaries whom we serve, including our ongoing work to eliminate use of the Social Security number on Medicare cards. This effort is an important step in protecting beneficiaries from becoming victims of identity theft, one of the fastest growing crimes in the country. As we all know, identity theft can disrupt lives, damage credit ratings, and result in inaccuracies in medical records. Thanks to congressional leadership, and in particular Chairman Johnson, whom I'm sorry is not here today, and members of the Ways and Means Committee, and based on the recommendations of our colleagues from the Government Accountability Office, CMS will eliminate the Social Security number-based identifier on Medicare cards by April 2019, as Congress directed us, as part of the Medicare Access and Chip Reauthorization Act of 2015, known as MACRA. We very much appreciate Congress providing us with the resources necessary to undertake this important project. Beginning in April of 2018, all newly enrolled Medicare beneficiaries will receive a Medicare card with a new Medicare beneficiary identifier, known as the MBI. At the same time, CMS will begin distributing the new Medicare cards to our current beneficiaries. This new Medicare number will have the same number of characters as the current 11-digit Social Security number-based health insurance claim number, known as the HICN, but will be visibly different and distinguishable from the HICN. With the introduction of the MBI, for the first time, CMS will have the ability to terminate a Medicare number and issue a new number to a beneficiary in instances where they are a victim of identity theft or their Medicare number has been compromised in some way. Transitioning to the MBI will help beneficiaries to better safeguard their personal information by reducing the exposure of their Social Security numbers. CMS has already removed the Social Security number from many types of our communications, including the Medicare summary notices that are mailed to beneficiaries on a quarterly basis. We've prohibited private Medicare Advantage plans and Medicare Part D prescription drug plans from using Social Security numbers on their enrollees' insurance cards. Many people wonder why CMS has used an identifier based on the Social Security number in the first place. When the Medicare program was established in 1965, it was actually the Social Security Administration who administered the program. While CMS is now responsible for management of Medicare, the Social Security Administration still enrolls beneficiaries, and both CMS and the Social Security Administration rely on interrelated systems to coordinate eligibility for Medicare benefits and for Social Security benefits. Currently, healthcare providers use the HICN when they submit claims in order to receive payment for healthcare services and also for supplies. And CMS and its contractors use the HICN to process those claims, authorize payments, and to issue some beneficiary communications. We're in the process of making changes to over 75 of our affected systems to replace those systems indicators with the MBI over the HICN. And we have developed the software that will generate MBIs and assign them to beneficiaries. We're working with our key partners such as SSA, Railroad Retirement Board, states and territories, the Indian Health Service, Department of Defense, Department of Veterans Affairs, healthcare providers, and other key stakeholders, there are a lot of them, to ensure that beneficiaries continue to receive access to services, and our partners will be able to process using the new MBI. We're implementing an extensive and phased outreach and education program for the estimated 60 million beneficiaries who will be receiving new cards, as well as to providers, private health plans, other insurers, clearinghouses, and other stakeholders. This fall, we'll tell Medicare beneficiaries they'll be receiving a new card, instruct them on when they'll be receiving it, and what to do with their old cards. We're also working to make sure that providers and other physicians and other healthcare providers are prepared to serve patients throughout the transition by creating information for providers, both for them to update their records with the new MBI and also for them to help remind beneficiaries that they need to bring their new cards with them when they see their doctors. We know from other successful large-scale implementations that it helps to allow time for all stakeholders to adjust to the changes. And so beginning in April of 2018, when we begin to mail out the cards, CMS will have a 21-month-long transition period during which our systems will accept transactions, both containing the MBI and also the HICN. Throughout our programs, we are committed to safeguarding personal information. Redesigning the Medicare card to remove the Social Security number-based identifier is a very important step for CMS in helping to combat identity theft and further protect our beneficiaries. Thank you very much for your interest in our progress today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Mr. Oswalt, thank you for being here. You can proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rice, Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Kelly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in your joint hearing on government use of Social Security numbers across the government and VA, and the steps that VA is taking to find ways to eliminate Social Security numbers from VA systems. VA's mission is to serve with dignity and compassion America's veterans and their families. This mission is contingent upon accurate and timely information being readily available. If we are to advocate for veterans, ensure they receive the medical care, benefits, social support, and lasting memorials they have rightfully earned in service to our nation, VA must properly identify, verify, and coordinate this protected information entrusted to us. The Department interfaces with many other federal agencies, including, but not limited to, the Department of Defense, the Social Security Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Department of Education. VA's primary uses of SSNs are threefold. One, locate veterans and their dependents to ensure correct identification associated with the delivery of health care and services. Identify employees for employment record keeping. And three, ensure 100% accuracy in patient identification. Mistaken identity in the delivery of health care can result in catastrophic and tragic outcomes. Until such time when a comprehensive and equally accurate means to do so is established and implemented, the use of SSNs remains the best means of ensuring patient identification. In addition, SSNs must be used if required by law or regulation for purposes such as background investigations, income verification, and the matching of computer records between government agencies. Elimination of the SN use is not solely a function of information technology, IT. The business processes used by the Veterans Health Administration, VHA, the Veterans Benefits Administration, VBA, and VA offices require a complete overhaul in how they establish absolute identity verification inside VA and, equally important, outside VA. IT solutions to eliminate SSN use can only occur after our integrated and comprehensive review of SSN's use and its interconnectedness is complete. VA recognizes the growing threat posed by identity theft and the impact on veterans, dependents, and employees. In 2009, VA created and implemented the enterprise-wide Social Security reduction effort, Social Security number reduction effort. The goal of the SSNR is to gather and catalog SSN use, leading to the reduction and/or elimination of the SSN as the VA's primary identifier, all while maintaining the 100% requirement for proper veteran patient identification. For example, VHA has eliminated the full SSN use on appointment letters, routine correspondence, and the Veterans Health Identification Card. VA Mail-Out Pharmacy has eliminated the SSN from prescription bottles and mailing labels. As a whole, VA has removed SSNs from several forms where such use was deemed not necessary. VBA is modifying an existing contract to replace SSNs with barcode labels on all outgoing correspondence. Completion of that effort is expected in November of this year. As VA migrates away from SSN use, the Office of Information Technology is collaborating with stakeholders to continue expanding the use of the Master Veteran Index, MVI, a registry of veterans, their beneficiaries, and other eligible persons. MVI serves as the authoritative identity source within VA and generates and assigns an integrated control number, or ICN, for each veteran. The use of MVI as a unique identifier continues to expand, with the ultimate goal being the replacement of the SSN as a primary identifier. There are many challenges facing VA regarding the elimination of the unnecessary collection and use of the SSN. This includes an enterprise-wide system analysis that needs to be conducted to find and identify the large volume of interface systems that VA needs for clinical care and administrative functions. Undertaking a robust education and retraining program for employees to implement any new unique identifier. This has already begun, but it will take time to integrate fully into our work processes. And acceptance by the veteran community. A change of this magnitude across the entire VA system will require substantial outreach and education. VA has made considerable progress towards eliminating the unnecessary use of SSNs and continues to reduce the use of SSNs with the goal to replace it with an alternative primary identifier. This concludes my testimony, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oswalt. We now turn to questions. As is customary for each round of questions, I will limit my time to 5 minutes, and I will ask my colleagues to also limit their questioning time to 5 minutes as well. Mr. Oswalt, I want to start with you. You were just speaking of the hurdles that the VA has to cross to eliminate the Social Security number, and of course how critical it is that we make sure that we identify each patient. Their lives are in the balance, right? They make sure they get the right medication and so forth. So you were saying that as a replacement for the Social Security number, you had started implementing an ICN. What you didn't tell us is how long it's going to take to get that done. What would be your best estimate for when you can get that done?
Well, the MVI, which is the registry of all certain types of identifiers, has been in place in various incarnations since 1999.
So you don't use Social Security numbers anymore?
Excuse me, sir?
So you don't use Social Security numbers?
We do use Social Security, but its use as a primary identifier is still in the VA processes. The ICN is generated by all the information that the MVI collects. So using that ICN as a means to identify a veteran as their information traverses the system, or a machine talking to a machine, that has happened to a large extent already. It's Primarily, the SSN use is when there's a human-to-human interface between a clinician and a patient.
Do you still have their Social Security numbers on their little wristbands?
Yes, sir, we do. There is an effort underway, and I believe on a pilot level, right now, we are seeking to eliminate the full SSN with the goal of being a complete elimination. And there's also a barcoded. Do you
have any kind of a timetable for that?
Sir, I'd have to take that and provide that for the record, because I'm not aware of the project's status.
Thank you, Mr. Oswalt. Ms. Jackson, your testimony was very interesting and exciting to me. You said by 2018 you will eliminate the Social Security number from the Medicare cards. You're moving at lightning speed for the federal government. Thank you. Thank you for your efforts. Mr. DeVries, you said something that was very interesting to me. You have stopped collecting Social Security numbers for applicants for employment at the federal government, for the federal government?
Correct, sir. When a applicant is going to enter into or wants to come into the federal government and they go to the USA job site, we no longer collect that Social Security number from them at that time. Correct.
When do you collect their Social Security number?
So we don't collect it. The agency, once we match up the job applicants against the job posting through what we call USA staffing, and the agency takes that referral list and the list of applicants, and they narrow it down and they make the final selection. When they bring that person on to make them an employee offer, that's when the agency that's hiring them collects that from them then.
Okay, I know they would use their Social Security number for tax withholdings and such. What else would they use their Social Security number for when they were looking to hire somebody?
So it's mostly that. It's your status of employment and then the benefits that come with it, whether it be the pay and the reporting back to the IRS and the Social Security side of the house.
Do you do criminal background checks in any agency of the government?
So once you become an employee, and if your position requires that, then when you submit in for the background investigation, then that would also be the primary use. And then similar to what we do within VA, though, once it gets into the background investigation system, then there's a different number that becomes the controlling number for it.
And since this massive hacking that occurred several years ago, I assume you've implemented a lot more protections to prevent that from happening again.
Yes, sir.
This is lock-in 4, gosh, amazing statistics. Did I hear you correctly that you verify 2 billion requests per year? Is that right?
2 billion verifications, yes.
Wow, so that would be like 6 for every single living person in the country.
Yes, it's worth noting that more than half of those are federal and state agencies that are verifying numbers with us, and that can happen multiple times throughout a year if they're processing, for example, an application for benefits.
Great. OMB has required agencies to eliminate the unnecessary use of Social Security numbers, but they never defined what necessary use is. How do each of your agencies define necessary use? I'll start with you, Mr. Wilshusen. The microphone.
Actually, I don't know how my agency has defined Social Security or unnecessary use. What we did in terms of our audit of the other agencies is determine to what extent that they have identified how they use. And what we found out of the 24 CFO Act agencies is that a number of them, like 4, I believe, did not even define what unnecessary use is, and another 8 didn't really have it documented or did not have a formal definition, but rather compared it to, based it on the judgment of the individuals who are making the particular assessments on Social Security use.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses again. What a credit to government service you are, and I thank you for being here today. And just a couple of questions. First, it's got to be incredibly hard to operate an agency that is the largest insurer in the nation, and to do so with a 99% loss ratio, the envy of any private sector insurance company. Kudos to you. Not without its problems and complexities, one of which we're exploring here today in terms of making sure we get after fraud and abuse. And as we've said many times on the committee, anyone who abuses this system, a sacred trust, ought to get the ultimate penalty. And I'm all for strengthening anything that we can do to further crack down on this. What we've heard in your testimony today is a couple of things that strike me. Number one, we have a 13% increase overall with the baby boomers coming through this system, and yet you've had a 10% overall cut in your budget. One has to ask, how are you able to manage with these increases and the complexity of the problems that you face, including hacking? Now, listen, I'm one of those people that would also concur that, hey, listen, you don't always, cuts in service, if they're replaced by technology that is current, can overcome those things. But it seems to me like you're also saddled with legacy IT that needs to be updated and improved, and yet there aren't the resources that we funnel you to do that. Is that a fair assessment?
You have cited some of our challenges, yes. I think I will mention, though, that we are embarking on a very ambitious IT modernization plan. We know that we cannot continue to operate the way that we're operating. And
now, when you say you're embarking on it, do you have the money for it, and where are we going? It seems like a lot of the problems and concerns that we're confronted with, especially in the area of veterans, et cetera, and I noticed the wristband concerns that were brought up in terms of identification, that if we have the resources, and certainly we have the technological capability, why wouldn't we protect what is the government's leading program to protect and assist its citizens? Do you need more money?
I think our budget folks are coming up to brief your staff on the 18 budget, but I will say that the 18 budget attempts to balance service and stewardship, as well as improving the efficiency with which we operate. The IT modernization plan that I mentioned is something that we're looking forward to advancing, and we're considering that to be an agency priority. So we are going to dedicate the funding to support that. Part of that will help us to modernize our communications infrastructure and remove the SSN from the remaining notices.
What's very alarming to us, and I know that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle share this as well, is that we know how vital this program is to all of our citizens. We know, and everyone can attest to the long waits on disability in terms of processing claims. It seems in a country as gifted as we are with IT, this ought to be something that we ought to be able to solve rather easily. So it's further frustrating when we continue to see cuts in the budget, and quite alarming today when we have the president's budget is revealed with about a $70 billion cut in Social Security, which to me is unconscionable, especially given the president's previous statements about preserving and saving, if not expanding, these benefits to keep pace actuarially where they should be from where we were in 1983 when we actually last looked at this from in a business actuarial sound position. I really believe that we can close a lot of these gaps with appropriate technology and assistance from the rank and file, who I would also note, according to testimony in previous hearings, that frontline members in Social Security offices are our best line of defense against fraud and abuse and waste. And they don't get enough credit. And continuing to cut the budget instead of looking at investments in both IT and where we can be more efficient and successful, I think is where we need to go. Thank you.
And just to clarify, the president's not talking about cutting benefits. He's talking about cutting administrative costs. Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forgive me, who would be the most technical of all of you? All right. I need you to work through something with me and correct me if I'm not hearing something correctly. I have a BNC, I have a PUID, I have an MBI, I have an ICN. Are these all on a common registry that, a derivation table that you tag in technology and you pull back and tag?
No, sir.
In that case, forgive me, and look, I've only been reading the testimony and the things here, but what I see is absurd technology-wise. Without a common central token system, and forgive me, but if you use Apple Pay here, Apple Pay does not hold your credit card number. What it does is it creates a one-time use token. The token hands off, matches, is handed back a number, reflects back. You all have IT budgets, you're trying to solve a problem, but in many ways, if I need you to walk me through, is my fear that the problem may just gotten worse because I have the VA now with one set of numbers, I have Medicare with a different set of numbers, I have OPM with a different set, I'm now going to have Social Security with another blind identifiers. Have we just made the problem much worse, at least for the customer service aspect?
So if I could, let me address that to a limited degree here. What you just heard here was exactly the case. We took the one common field, it's called 9-digit Social Security number that grew up for decades, became ubiquitous in every form that we filled out. And then we said, we can't show that, we can't display it out, we got to cut the use of that to where it's not publicly used.
No,
So
and I
we
understand you're
created
directed
schemas
to
in.
blind it.
We created schemas in for each one of these things. I came from several years inside DOD, and so when I become a DOD member, I become a veteran at the end of that thing, yet I get a different number. And now I am a civil servant, I get a different number yet. And so how do we unite that thing? And that's where we need the unification at the top there to help drive the standardization of these things, and then how do you link them back? Because at the end of the day, I still need to tie the different benefits that come at it from the various employment opportunities and medical.
Does everyone see what I'm observing is we may be actually, in our attempt to blind these numbers, creating another cascade effect that's going to create a whole new level of complication. And that is when my veteran happens to also be working on his Medicare, who also is dealing with a Social Security dispute that may be wanting to go back to work for the federal government at the Park Service, and now I have a handful of different numbers. On just the top of my head, and this is, I'm on the edge of my technical expertise, I could come to you right now and, whether it be in a distributive ledger model, but some sort of common tokenization, where I hand this number, I get the handoff, and I would get a constant match. It wouldn't stop you all from doing what you're doing, but we would have to actually build a common, unified clearinghouse data system that would reflect all the numbers and then hand back the one-time use token. But that may be a unifying solution to solve actually a number of our problems, which is, I can actually take you all the way to Social Security, earned income tax credit fraud, and a whole number of other things that it could actually help on. Am I way out of my league here from your area of expertise? Am I seeing a unifying problem here?
You are correct, sir. And, in my opening remarks, I talked about the program unique identifier, and the concept there was to keep the Social Security number as the gold place. You protect that, you surround it, but you don't bring it out. And then you have programs, and so each of these could be a unique program, and they would have structures to their numbering schemes, and they own the numbering schemes, just like we talked about today here, but then it gets associated back to it, and that's what gets shared out. If his Medicare card gets confiscated or lost, we cut him a new one. It does not start the whole process.
I mean, it obviously would be easier if every time someone used a Medicare benefit, they had a chip card that handed off a new token. But the fact of the matter is, you and I could design the same thing where I type in to this time the unique number, it hands off. It may be worth a conversation for those who are interested in this type of technology. Maybe as the committee here, we need to sort of, and it's going to take some resources, but there's got to be a unified theory we could get to make this simpler. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Social Security numbers have become used as the principal method of identity verification in and across agencies. However, that the very fact makes them lucrative targets for identity thieves. Mr. Wilhusen, okay. You testified that SSNs are particularly risky because they can, quote, connect an individual's PII across many agencies, information systems, and databases. Can you explain how the widespread use of Social Security numbers increases the risk of identity theft?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. One of the reasons is that it's available, and if it's not properly secured, in our work on information security at federal agencies, when we looked at the examination or examined the security controls over the agency's information, we have often found that the security controls are not effective to the extent to where they can adequately protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information and systems at those agencies. So by having stores of Social Security number in a particular agency, and if it's not adequately protected, then that information can be used not only for that agency, but can be used as an identifier for that individual at other agencies and indeed in the private sector as well. And so just last year, in fiscal year 2016, agencies reported about 8,300 incidents involving PII to the U.S. CERT for fiscal year 16. So it's a present problem.
Mm-hmm. How could the use of such an alternate identifier reduce the risk of identity theft?
Well, for one, it may limit the extent to which an alternative ID may be used to identify that individual with other databases at other entities. So it's an opportunity to limit the extent that that identifier can be used across various different organizations.
And you talked about in your testimony, no such identifier was available. Can you expound on that?
Well, that's one that's not universally as accepted and applicable as the Social Security number. We did report that in certain instances at certain organizations, including like DOD and VA or VHA, where they've started to use an alternate identifier other than Social Security numbers to provide for their members and that require one.
Okay. And despite OPM's failure to implement an alternate in 2008, the agency proposed a program, Unique Identifier Initiative, in 2015 to provide an alternative way for identifying records in government systems. Mr. DeVries, is that correct, and can you elaborate on that?
Ma'am, could I get the last part of your question there?
I asked about the proposed program Unique Identifier Initiative in 2015 to provide an alternate way for identifying records in government systems, and can you elaborate on that?
Yes, ma'am. So again, going back to, from a program perspective, if you define a program as being a functional area of interest, so like say CMS, VA, DOD, and some other ones, there are benefits and other things that must get reported and attributed back to the individual. When I was born, I got a Social Security number. I went up and I worked as a teenager. I went to college. I started the workforce. Along the way, I accrued these different benefits, but each one gets recorded in their own way. So by uniting and kind of going what we talked about before with a ledger that says, here's the program owner for this card, for this numbering scheme, and we standardize the numbering, then you can reuse those things. And again, just as he pointed out, we would not, if you lose your Medicare card, you lose the connectivity of what that thing represented in the Medicare business, but not across the whole financial institutions and all the other ones. The challenge is how do I work that thing, not only at the federal level, at the agencies here, but then down to the agencies that report into us and also to the state and local government things, because everything is coded into these various programs. The Social Security Administration talked about the number of systems she has. They keep on exploding when you go down to the state and local government side of the house too, and all those have to be linked together there at some point in time. But I think we can take it one phase at a time.
I worked for the state of Illinois, and it was the same issue there, and I wondered, do states change it on their own, one by one, or how does that work? Do they decide to make changes? Because I think before I left, they did make some changes because they had Social Security numbers on everything. I know.
I'll let my esteemed colleagues talk here, but within the Department of Defense, when we moving away from Social Security numbers on all of our ID cards and so forth, that did not happen overnight. It came with putting out a standard, coming up with a schema, as we talked about, and then enforcing it.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilshausen, let me start with you. One of the things that I haven't seen referenced here is the use of Social Security numbers and the hacking that goes on with the IRS. It probably won't surprise you to know that I, among how many million others Americans, have had their Social Security number hacked for IRS purposes. The solution to that was we'll issue a PIN number. So you get a PIN number mailed to you so you can file your taxes. Do you know what happened this year on that?
I understand that those PIN numbers were also compromised in some extent.
They were. So I didn't get a PIN number. I can only begin to describe to you the entertainment of trying to file my taxes, as well as I don't know how many other million Americans, when in fact they don't have PIN numbers that will work either, and they can't file electronically or another way with their Social Security number. Mm-hmm. The point the reason I raise it is the point that Mr. Schweikert's raised, which is if in fact, rather than independent agencies creating their own identifiers, a PIN number, all the acronyms, I don't know if anybody's watching this or will watch this tape, but most Americans, their eyes will glaze over with acronyms. If you, in fact, private sector has a variety of approaches to create an identifier, a token system. And I'm shocked at this point that there hasn't been substantial conversation as to why we don't set a centralized process so someone can trigger that and create a token for not only benefits, but when they pay their taxes. Why is that not a more active effort at this point in time rather than individual efforts?
I think that's definitely a possibility in everything, but I think you also touch upon the fact that these numbers, regardless of their provenance, if you will, need to be adequately protected by agencies in their information systems. And we have found traditionally that there are the security controls over agency systems needs to be improved.
Oh, I wouldn't disagree with you one bit. You've got two issues. One is the user using it, their number, and the agency securing it. And those are two separate dilemmas on the problem. But we seem to be making one harder by issuing all kinds of different identifiers, which in the case of the IRS, that was compromised as well. So what's to prevent being compromised? This additional effort we've made and all the money we put into it, rather than have an encrypted token-based system that allows us to do that. And that technology has existed in the private sector for a fair amount of time. So I would encourage the agencies to begin actively, and we should talk about it further, Mr. Chair, about how it is we actually encourage doing something that's integrated, that secures it through a token system that's encrypted. At least protects that end, the user end. If I can, real quick, Mr. Oswald, before my time runs out, I was looking through your testimony, listening to you. I returned a little late from the floor to hear everyone, and I apologize. There's some notations here that I guess troubled me a bit. VA is currently evaluating the elimination of Social Security numbers from correspondence. I'm trying to find a polite way to word my response on that. It's nice that they're evaluating that. How long does it take VA to evaluate that?
Sir, since we began the SSN reduction effort, I mean, a number of correspondence and forms generally have been scrubbed. If there's a compelling business need for it, it would remain. We have an SSN number review board that reviews things from a department-wide standpoint. I can't attest right now, I can submit it for the record, what forms and letter correspondence still as that. But as I said in my oral testimony.
Well, I want to get a couple minutes. Let me ask for the record that you do submit the number of forms, correspondence, and what their purpose is, what the justification is for the record, because I don't understand why it is on correspondence we're sending out that we still put the Social Security number on there. And in fact, if we put the Social Security number, we put the whole Social Security number. My goodness gracious, guys. Question number 2 for you. You made a comment about the Social Security number still being on their wristbands. Now, my guess is everybody in the room has been in the hospital for one purpose or other, or been into a lab, and you get a wristband. I haven't seen a Social Security number on a wristband at a medical institution in close to a decade, maybe 7 years. Why in the world would you still put it on when they're hospitalized?
Well, there is a barcoded SSN that allows the clinician to talk to machine to the barcode. So that's used as a form of patient identification and verification. I think I mentioned in my oral testimony, there's a pilot at a number of VA sites underway where we're using the last 4. Eventually, we'll move away from the full human-readable SSN, and the integration control number, the ICN, will replace that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're back. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Pasquarel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. Ms. Jackson, I sat on the Ways and Means Health Subcommittee. We had extensive conversations with the Social Security Agency about the process for removing Social Security numbers from Medicare cards. Hearing again about this process is enough to make your head spin. At the time we had this dialogue, it was quite clear that Social Security, quote unquote, did not have the funding to do this. That's what we said to us. Now, can you explain how what seems like a pretty simple task of removing the Social Security numbers from Medicare cards can be such a challenge that CMS's to the system that you use in terms of information technology? Tell me what's going on.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to that. We have at CMS been looking into the removal of the Social Security number from the Medicare card for a number of years, but it was not until Congress gave us the resources to be able to implement the system changes both in our internal systems and also in the data exchanges and the updates that we must do with the Social Security Administration, with the Railroad Retirement Board, who also use a HICN-based identification card, updating information in our internal systems, as well as informing providers and healthcare providers and Medicare beneficiaries about their need to use a new card when they both provide care on the healthcare provider side and for billing purposes, and also when a beneficiary goes to receive care from their doctor or from their hospital. To move forward with implementation of the Medicare beneficiary identifier, we have made system changes over the past couple of years. We hit a major milestone this past weekend in assigning new Medicare beneficiary identifiers to all Medicare beneficiaries, which now will allow us to begin the testing process with all of our systems and our data exchange partners to then be able to mail the card and begin the transition period. We expect to have this completely implemented by April of 2019, with the beginning of mailing of cards in April of 2018. The transition period for us is very important so that all stakeholders are able to receive the new MBI, submit bills and claims using the new MBI, and to assure that health care is still available and provided to Medicare beneficiaries.
In the new identifiers will be the same number as the past?
No, the new identifier, it's an 11-digit code, but it is an alphanumeric code that is randomly assigned, was randomly assigned when we did the enumeration over the weekend, does not look anything like the current health insurance claim number.
Okay, so we've done it with some resources, and you proved it could be done, and the system will be complete in 2019.
That's correct.
Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, we will.
Well, that's pretty big, and you're standing by that.
I am standing by that. We actually will be ready to receive the MBI on claim submissions by April of 2018.
Thank you. Mr. DeVries, in your testimony, where are you? Oh, here. Am I pronouncing that correctly, sir?
Yes, sir.
You stated that it is difficult to completely eliminate the federal use of Social Security numbers without a government-wide coordinated effort and dedicated, you said, dedicated funding. That's what you said, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you explain how OPM would use additional funding to try to achieve the goal of limiting the federal government's use of Social Security numbers?
In the case of OPM, where we exchange the important data between a retiree, a federal retiree with the Social Security and with the IRS for the tax purposes there, that underlying thing would still be coded and still be exchanging through the Social Security number. But again, the communication that goes out to the federal retiree benefit is a different number there. We do, in fact, do that today for the retirement services, where you get a different control number when you become a federal retiree, and that's how all action is tracked back to you.
Mr. Chairman?
In terms of the money to change the systems, we're operating systems today, and just as CMS probably experienced that you need the infusion of money to do coding and other changes and testing as you prepare this parallel highway, if you will, of how we're doing it there.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, may I just add this into the record? I heard from one of our members, and I need to correct the record, said that the president's budget does not cut Social Security benefits, but it does. In the budget, it cuts Social Security disability by up to $64 billion. I think the record needs to be corrected, and maybe the congressman who said it needs to be corrected.
Thank you, sir. Mr.
You're
Hurd.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Oswald, I was confused by an earlier exchange. Do we know how many documents within the VA have the Social Security number printed on it?
We know what we know right now. It's an ongoing, expanding effort. There is a Social Security number reduction tool.
So correct me if I'm wrong. There's a bunch of forms that the VA sends out. We should know how many of those are. One of the data elements on that form is Social Security. Why does it take years to go through each form and delete that data element or not show it on the underlying form?
Sir, I have to submit for the record the history of why it's taken so long, but there are a number of instances where it's in the work.
Ms. Jackson, how many forms does your organization have that prints Social Security number on it?
With the implementation of the Medicare beneficiary identifier, we won't have any forms that will issue the Social Security number. Over the past couple of years,
so you're saying 2019 is when we're going to be successful in achieving that. Why again, we currently, right now, there's X number of forms that produce, when they're printed out, on that form, it includes a Social Security number, correct?
No, sir, I'm sorry. I should have been clearer. Our correspondence with Medicare beneficiaries, we have truncated the Social Security number on all that correspondence with the exception of one document, which is our Medicare premium billing form. That still does include the health insurance claim number. I'm sorry, I can't remember if it is truncated. That will be the document that will be replaced with the MBI when we implement.
Ms. LaCanfora, how many forms does your organization produce that has the full Social Security number on it?
Currently, we send out about 233 million notices or forms of correspondence each year that still have the Social Security number.
And how many, so is it 200, that many unique, or is it 5 different kinds of correspondence?
Oh, there's over 1,000 separate types of notices.
So we have 1,000 documents, and one of those elements, when it gets printed out, is Social Security number. Why can you not just delete that from when you run a batch?
So we have deleted the number or removed the number and replaced it with the beneficiary notice code on over 100 million notices. We have another 42 million that we're doing in fiscal year 18. The challenge that we have is twofold. One is that there are 60 separate, disparate systems that produce notices, those 1,000 plus notices. So the resources needed to make the changes are significant. Beyond that, the other significant issue or challenge that we have is that The Social Security number was created to do business with our agency. And so when we mail out a notice to someone and they, for example, are being told that they have an overpayment, they might pick up the phone and call us, and we've got to be able to quickly identify who they are and what their issues are.
Mr. DeVries, Estonia has done this. Estonia has moved to a system where it's a tokenization. Now, there are 1.3 million people, which is the size of my hometown of San Antonio, a little bit different. But they've achieved the ability to have this interoperable number across all of their government agencies. We've talked about tokenization here. In your role within OPM, what do you need in order, ultimately this is a shared service, right? And how do we implement a shared service at OPM when it comes to an identifier across all the federal government?
Chairman Hurd, that's a great question. I'm not sure the exact answer because what you're talking about is through the token and the bit chain type technology and so forth. That's one I think that we need to work with industry closer on and bring that to the federal government side of the house because it's not the same thing as it is on the industry side of the house. I'm desperately trying to reach out there for it. We're still stymied by how do you bring that technology in and then infuse it into, and it's really our application systems. It's not our hardware systems. It's the applications that are writing in and changing those.
Mr. Wilshusen, in the last 30 minutes of my time, you reference legacy IT being a barrier. What do we need to do in order to prevent that from being a barrier?
Well, that's one of the problems in terms of with legacy systems. Often they may not be able to handle newer numbers. And so in order to be able to do that, it requires significant system change or modification.
I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for your help with the committee's work. Mr. DeVries, back in 2015, I think it was July, OPM disclosed that its information technology systems had experienced a massive data breach, compromising the Social Security numbers, names, addresses, background information, birth dates, and the background investigation records for about 22 million people who had applied for sensitive positions with the FBI, CIA, NSA, and we had a hearing subsequent to that breach, and I actually asked your predecessor, Ms. Archuleta, I asked her if she was even taking the most rudimentary steps to protect the Social Security numbers. Are we even encrypting them within the system at OPM? And I'm very sad to hear her testify that no, at that time in 2015, we were not encrypting. And I urged them to do that. Then a year later, we had a follow-up hearing with Ms. Colbert. I think she had some operational responsibility there. I asked her the same question a year later if that job was complete. She testified that no, it was not complete. And so we come full cycle here, and you're here, and I got to ask you, now Ms. Colbert said our system did not allow encryption of Social Security numbers. And I just want you to tell me something good. Tell me that we've encrypted these Social Security numbers. It's, you know, it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. I read an article last Sunday in the New York Times where a bunch of our sources in China are being killed off, either killed or imprisoned, U.S. sources, foreign intelligence sources. And, you know, I got to think that, well, that hack was attributed to the Chinese government. I know the hack actually came after, at least we found out about it after many of these people were executed in China for cooperating with the United States government. They were shot as spies or imprisoned as spies. But you see, especially with sensitive information like this for secure positions, we're really exposing our personnel, our intelligence officers, and anyone who cooperates with them to grave mortal threat. And so we've really got to step up our game here. So let me go back to my question. Are we encrypting these Social Security numbers?
Representative Lynch, yes, we are. I have all the databases that contained the Social Security numbers and other PII stuff encrypted, with the exception of one database that resides in the mainframe, which is now sitting behind other security controls and detection systems, and that is scheduled for completion, which is a little bit more of a challenge because it's on the mainframe, to be completed this calendar year.
Okay. Running your house, so we had this hack about 10 days ago, this ransomware attack. It was basically not stealing our information, but preventing people from utilizing that. Most of the impact was overseas. They tell me that was because much of that software was bootleg software that Microsoft, Windows, well, they bought it bootleg so that the fixes and all that were not available for those people. But do you feel that we have major vulnerability from that type of hack as far as our user population goes?
So I would say yes, and I think that's the lowest common denominator that we all got to take steps to keep on educating both the families at home as well as the workforce itself. Within OPM, there was no choice. Their systems are patched. That's a call that the director supports, and I make it as the CIO, and I think that's the right approach to take, just as you would in any kind of corporation there.
Okay, all right. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here with us today to talk about this important issue. Identity theft affects over 12 million Americans per year, and it costs the victims just over $350 on average. That's on average. You hear cases of it taking people years and a lot more money to sort of get it straightened out. And I've been one of those people that have unfortunately been the victim of identity theft. Social Security numbers and other personal information like dates of birth that information is very coveted by hackers who steal that personally identifiable information from breaches of the Office of Personnel Management, from health insurance companies, from the United States Postal Service, and even retailers like Target. And while I'm encouraged that the Office of Management and Budget's initiative, when they issued the 2007 memo calling for agencies to reduce collected and retained information and to strengthen the security of sensitive information, these recent hacks show that OPM and other agencies are still fundamentally very ill prepared, and many American sensitive information is still very vulnerable to attack. And that's why reducing the superfluous collection and retention of Social Security numbers is so important. It's troubling to see that after 10 years, Government Accountability Office reports show that only 2 of 24 agencies examined met the requirements for a complete plan to reduce unnecessary usage of Social Security numbers. And it's even more troubling that the Office of Management and Budget has provided very little guidance to agencies to help with the transition. In addition, to exacerbate matters, the President's budget proposal guts agency personnel and operating budget, further limiting their capacity to protect information and to improve their systems. So whether it's a lack of funding or lack of guidance, 10 years after the issuance of the memo, we should be in a better position to safeguard America's personal information. And I recognize that there are clear barriers that agencies face in reducing the collection of Social Security numbers. For example, in many cases, states mandate the collection of that information. I just wanted to note before I delve into questions that I think it's interesting that today we're discussing the progress of agencies to reduce the collection of Social Security numbers, when tomorrow this same committee will be marking up a bill to add a new requirement on an agency to collect and verify Social Security numbers. So on the one hand, we're saying don't collect them and don't collect them superfluously. And then on the other hand, we're going to be mandating the collection of that information. And I think it's both ironic and hypocritical of us on this dais to be doing both things. But aside from that comment, Mr. DeVries, in the GAO's report, it mentions that OPM proposed using an alternate federal employee identifier, but withdrew that regulation because the identifier wasn't available. What are the barriers to creating a new identifier for federal employees or for agencies to use in their administration of benefits?
Representative Sanchez, thank you for that question. And again, I think the complexity or the barriers to overcome here is the size and complexity of the government. Just as the witnesses here at the table represent a few of the agencies, every agency really has a collection thing that kind of ties back to an individual and the benefits that get tied to it, whether it be their pay or their benefits and medical and so forth. How do you then create that architecture? And again, going back to what Chairman Hurd talked about, you have to have that architecture in hand as you begin to even talk about the token use or other bit chain type stuff. How do you then promulgate that down? My colleague to my left here talked about how they roll out the whole Medicare new number there. It's not done overnight. It's a process there. It is based upon the architecture there.
And cuts in funding, how does that affect the ability to protect sensitive information effectively?
So it's there's in every agency there's probably just enough dollars to make that go. When I'm going to try and do something else, I got to have that infusion to create something that goes alongside what I'm currently operating and bring in something new. Then I must turn off what I just got rid of.
And would you say that right now you're operating with the very best equipment that money can buy?
No, ma'am.
Would you say that the equipment that you have to work with on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of modern and efficient, where would it lie on that scale?
Ma'am, I'd say from an overall architecture and operating perspective, I would say it'd be about a 0.3 or 0.4.
So further budget cuts not necessarily helpful to rectifying that.
No.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. The federal government needs to ensure it is doing all it can to protect Americans' identities and that Social Security numbers are not being used unnecessarily. While progress has been made, based on what we've heard today, there's still a long way to go. Thank you to our witnesses for their testimonies. Thank you also to our members for being here. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
It looks good on TV.